Video game preservation. It's a hot topic in certain circles of the internet, and whether you support ROM hacks or crazy priced physical copies, I think we can all agree that the industry could be doing a better job of making older games more available. Especially when you're talking about a cult classic that's in heavy demand. Think about it. If you want to play Star Fox Adventure, it's locked on the GameCube. As crazy as it sounds, at the time of this recording, there is no way to play Chrono Trigger, like classic, everybody loves it Chrono Trigger on a modern console. Like the entire beginnings of the Ratchet and Clank franchise are frozen on the PlayStation 3. You can only stream them through PlayStation Online. And until recently, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door has been a key title in this conversation. Now that it's available, let's dive into how it holds up. This is Nintendo Therapy second playthrough. There's an interesting phenomenon I've observed whenever a beloved game is made unavailable for such a large stretch of time. As that amount of time starts to add up, the game develops this legendary, almost mythic status. People who have love for the game will not stop championing it, and it's not creating any negative feedback because it's not generating new haters. I think we're seeing this happen right now with a few Nintendo titles that are in demand every time there are additions made to the Switch Online service. Games like Conker's Bad Fur Day, Donkey Kong 64, Mischief Makers, all on the Nintendo 64. In my opinion, these are perfectly fine games. And if they're among your favorites, I'm not trying to knock them. But the point I'm trying to illustrate, it's that the internet would have you believe these are masterpieces being kept away from you. Flawless works of art that no modern game has ever lived up to. And there aren't many people refuting these claims when they pop up because nobody's forming new opinions on what they can't buy. If they can't play it, they can't form a new opinion on it. So the game's status has calcified in our minds of just what the people who love this game are the loudest to say about it. I'm actually willing to bet money that this will happen with the 3DS title The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds if it's left on the 3DS. Over time, if we don't see a re-release of that game, its reputation and demand are going to start to build. The eShop shutting down has already made physical copies the only way for new players to gain access to that game. It's the first step towards a legendary climb. Now it just needs to go unnoticed and ignored by Nintendo for a few years, and I guarantee it'll stop popping up on more and more of people's best Zelda games of all time lists. And by the way, I actually do think that's one of the best Zelda games ever made, but that's just the example that I'm using here. Is you're not seeing it on a lot of lists right now, but you will if Nintendo keeps keeping it from you. This was always the way I viewed Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, because I wasn't following the Paper Mario series when it first released. I didn't get into Paper Mario until I downloaded the Nintendo 64 installment on the Wii Virtual Console in 2007. This was already 3 years too late to go back and experience the Thousand Year Door, and physical copies were already fetching a hefty price on eBay of around $80. Every time I would check, it only seemed to go up from there, so I decided to wait until I saw a copy out in the wild at a thrift store or a comic book shop or something, because then I at least wouldn't have to pay shipping and I could save a little bit of money, and also the internet prices were crazy. Maybe I'll see it for like $60 in a shop. Didn't happen. Then I waited for some kind of re-release on the Wii U eShop or something like that. I always wanted to play the game because of its legendary status, but I just couldn't justify spending more than the cost of a new game like Mario Odyssey on Paper Mario when there were so many recent games I hadn't played yet. Finally, in 2024, the Switch made my Paper Mario dreams come true. My overall impression after 2 playthroughs now is that I am glad I did not spend $120 on the GameCube version, because this updated version on the Switch is phenomenal. From everything I've read comparing the 2 versions, this is the definitive way to experience this game, and it's half the price a copy would have cost you secondhand. And I know the prices of those physical copies have been going down since this released, so that's even more reason for Nintendo to start making their games available. You're only helping the scalpers, Nintendo. Please, help the consumer. I've seen the side-by-side visuals. I don't think I would go back to the GameCube version, even though I know it runs at 60 frames a second and this one only runs at 30. I can't tell the difference. I'm not one of those people, and this version, perfect. Well, as perfect as a version of this game without making any changes could be. So this review, it's inevitably going to be making comparisons to the 2 games in the series that bookend Thousand Year Door, Paper Mario on the Nintendo 64 before it, and Super Paper Mario on the Wii after it. Super Paper Mario being another game lacking any video game preservation on modern consoles at the time of this recording, by the way. Let's also throw in the Super Nintendo classic Super Mario RPG, because I can't shut up about it, so we'll throw that in for good measure. It's one of my favorite video games of all time, and this is my review, so I make the rules. I know it's not Paper Mario, but whatever. So, if I had to rank the 4 titles from low to high now after finishing Thousand Year Door, I think I would say Super Paper Mario's down at number 4. Thousand Year Door kicks off the top 3, but I think I like the Nintendo 64 version more, and then Mario RPG sits at the top because nothing can dethrone it in my eyes. So, and you know what, for what it's worth, Origami King would outrank Super Paper Mario for me, so that would be my top 5. But if we start talking about every Mario RPG game, this review would be like 2 hours long, so I'm going to keep it focused here. Let's get into why it's number 3 on my list and not number 1 on my list. My first impression of the game, and the first note that I took, is probably more about how gaming has evolved over the years than it is about this particular title, but I was immediately impatient with the tutorial phase. The first hour and a half of Thousand Year Door tosses so many lessons at you, and it feels like the game, it's stopping you every few steps. Like, come on, I just got into this new town, I want to go explore it. I understand how to jump, I understand how to move my character around. Some games, even today, they fail at this fundamental distrust of the player. Like, how hard is it to just give us an option to skip these lessons? Back in the day, you used to have a tutorial on the main menu, and you wouldn't even put it in the game. That way, if people wanted to go through it, you go through it. If you don't, you just start the game, and the game assumes you already know everything. There's an in the middle that we can find, and that's probably the perfect mix. I have faith that I can figure this stuff out, but for some reason, every time I play Ocarina of Time, I need to be taught how to open a door. Mario 64 doesn't do that. Mario 64 makes you figure everything out on your own. The Pokemon series makes you relearn the basics of the franchise with each new installment, instead of letting the game say, you know, I know you've been here before. Let's just put this on an optional menu in case you need this, but most of you don't. This isn't anything I'm going to hold against Thousand Year Door. It's just worth mentioning that it was my first impression after like a decade of hearing about how this game was the greatest thing to ever happen to video games. I was kind of nervous at that point that the game wouldn't hold up to that legendary status, but you know, now that I've been through it, yeah, I'm just like, at the beginning, I'm always like, yeah, I get it, let me play, please. I think the gold standard for letting the player teach themselves is the Metroid series. This series, since day one, has been doing a great job of giving you a new ability at a steady, spread out pace, It allows you to experiment with the new ability, and then you figure it out, and then eventually that ability allows you to access another new ability, and you just keep building on what you can do. That's the perfect way to teach the player, is just spread out everything over the course of the first act. The Metroid formula, it gives you a new idea, lets you play with it, lets you use it for something key in the game progression, and then introduces a new idea. That's flawless. But I'm happy to say this frustration didn't last long, because Thousand Year Door, it has such a charm to its storytelling. It's self-aware and fourth wall breaking, and still confident in building the fictional world it creates. The storytelling, it's top-notch, even in the little details outside of the main story being told. Each NPC is interesting, keeps me coming back to them in hopes that they'll say something cute or like a one-liner or a joke reference to another beloved Nintendo property. There's a Toad in Petalburg that loves talking about video games he's playing, and at first he's pumped about the Fire Emblem game on his GBA. Later in the game, he's moved on to playing Paper Mario on the Nintendo 64. And by the end, he's playing Thousand Year Door. I don't know how he can be playing the game he's in, but he is. And that type of stuff is just, it's nice. It makes you want to keep talking to these characters. There's two crows in Twilight Town. They mention a real estate listing for Luigi's Mansion. There's a parrot who screeches "Shine Get," which that's the text in Mario Sunshine. When you complete a shine, it says "Shine Get." Like, I love when Nintendo packs in these in-jokes for fans. It feels like you're being rewarded just for playing Nintendo games. On top of all that flavor being sprinkled in by NPC characters, you have the added story of Luigi's adventure. It's like this running gag where talking to Luigi in each chapter prompts a new, long-winded speech filling Mario in on an adventure that his brother's allegedly having simultaneously. So they basically wrote two full separate game stories by including this. And I've heard a lot of fans say they wanted this to be a playable adventure as a bonus feature or something, but honestly, I think that kind of kills the joke. The implication is the comedy. If you make it real, then these moments would just be Luigi telling you the events of another game you could be playing. Like, if he was just saying everything that happened in Luigi's Mansion, it wouldn't be as interesting as if he's saying this adventure that you have to imagine in your mind. I've seen a few retrospectives on this game that mention all the backtracking as something else that hasn't aged well. Personally, I never had a problem backtracking in games like this for the most part. In fact, I mostly enjoy the backtracking in Thousand Year Door. I would hate if the game really expected me to only visit all of these amazing locations a single time and never look back. Especially in this world they've created with those previously mentioned NPCs. It would be such a waste. I could visit Twilight Town every play session if I had to. It's such a cool little place to be. Like, have every mission run through there. I wouldn't complain. If anything, I'd say they don't do this enough. There's some locations that you need to visit 4 or 5 times, like Glitzville. There's some, like Poshley Heights, you only see once or twice. Seriously, justice for Poshley Heights, because it's such a chill town to be in, and you almost never have to go there except for the chapter that it takes place in. Like, I want to know these people's stories just as much as the other townsfolk. Like, I want to know what's going on with everyone who lives here. It's just not there in the game, though. These are the most NPC of all the NPC players. These are the I am a farmer of NPC players. The only reason I think the backtracking annoys people is the enemies in the in-between areas can become a nuisance. You're not going to be able to perfectly avoid every single battle, and when you only get one experience point from some of the older fights, they're not worth your time at all. It would be a really easy fix for them to just have enemies level with you especially when backtracking is baked into the design of the game. Like, why have these enemies be worth nothing if you're going to send me back here? It doesn't make any sense. And before I hear the complaint, I know there are some examples of enemies being replaced with stronger versions in later chapters, but it doesn't happen enough in areas of the game to fix this complaint, in my opinion. There's way more examples of the enemies just staying the same from the first time you visit there for the rest of the game. Visiting the towns repeatedly, it's a great way to make the world feel like a real place too. You see subtle changes to the people and environments throughout the story, and you learn more about the people who live there, and it's a feature, not a bug to me. There is a bad example of backtracking in the game, though. The good backtracking is revisiting towns. The not so good backtracking is the way some of the in-between combat areas that I just talked about, them not updating the enemies, well, the way that works for story progression, even the first time you go there sometimes. There are multiple examples in the game of reaching a new area and starting. This is going to be hard to explain without a visual on a podcast, but you start on screen 1 and you travel from left to right, like, you're reading a book, left to right, without any branching paths. It's almost like a 2D Mario game, or kind of like some of the Yoshi games get into this like 3D, 2D hybrid. Anyway, you're traveling left to right without any branching paths until you move from screen 1 to screen 6. And then screen 6 gives you an objective that sends you from right to left now, all the way back to screen 1. Then screen 1 gives you an objective to move left to right to screen 5. 5 sends you to 1. 1 sends you to 6. You get the idea. You're ping-ponging back and forth, and it's padding. It's padding to make some of these chapters a little longer. They didn't want to make newer areas back in the GameCube era because they didn't have a lot of room to work with, and it stands out by today's standards. You're walking back and forth in the same hallway for an hour. Honestly, I think the reason it stands out is that there's too many of these areas that are that simple left to right hallway design. Even Paper Mario 64 had many areas with a north, south, east, and west exit. Or heck, even Super Mario RPG on the SNES, it had areas with multiple exit points. Thousand Year Door, at times it feels almost like a 2D side-scrolling design in a 3D world. It's kind of easy to see how Super Paper Mario on the Wii would take this design one step further and just straight up give us 2D side-scrolling mechanics. It's how the franchise was always going to evolve, even though people didn't want it to go there. We could see the signs here. It's not enough of a drawback to hurt the game's enjoyment or anything, but it is part of the reason I feel like this game, it's a bit overrated after being hyped up and unavailable for so long. The areas, they feel smaller because of this. It's obvious you're seeing the same screens over and over. It's like the background in a Hanna-Barbera cartoon. You're just watching this Mobius strip go by. There's a section of the game that might be a response to the backtracking, but it just ends up coming off as a different flavor of backtracking. The Fighting League chapter, it's confined to only about 2 or 3 explorable areas. There's backstage and the courtyard and a couple of transition screens in between, but every screen in these areas, it's too close together for me to really consider it backtracking. It's more like running in circles in the same area. You're doing the same thing over and over again. You fight in the battle area, you have something backstage, you fight in the battle area again, you do something backstage, you fight again, you do something in the courtyard now. The game puts the player through way too many of these matches before you eventually make it to the champion, which is the end of the chapter. I finished every fight the first try, and it still felt like too many matches. So I can't even imagine how repetitive this chapter would feel if you were struggling on some of these. It's too much. The saving grace for this reputation is, once again, the character's charm and Thousand Year Door's ability to make you fall in love with its world. There's a champion in this chapter named Rock Hawk. He's a cool design. He's an interesting character. The conversations you have with Gruba, who's another character in this chapter, are a fun detective story. And the whole area, it's just a joy to be in. I mean, this entire chapter is only a few steps removed from being a menu-based text game with how much it keeps you running in circles, but the characters keep it fun and interesting. It's not the only mission that involves Mario playing detective either. Chapter 3, the one I just described, it's more of a journalistic investigation into the corrupt world of professional fighting. Chapter 6 is a straight-up train mystery. There's a thief on board this train, and every passenger is a suspect. This chapter, it introduces Pennington, a Pennington character who is... He's like Sherlock Holmes as a penguin. He's Sherlock Holmes who never knows what he's talking about, but he thinks everything he says is brilliant. That's who Pennington is. He's like if Michael Scott from The Office were a detective. So, I don't know, forget Paper Luigi that everyone's asking about. Give me Detective Pennington on Switch 2. That's what I want. So, just changing gears here, one thing I do miss in the Paper Mario series in general is character customization. I miss equipping shirts and pants like in Super Mario RPG. Equipping badges for specific buffs and attack boosts is cool, but I'd like the second layer of customization that comes with armor and a weapon. I miss the feeling of going to a new town for the first time and running to the local shop to see what's new there for armor and weapons that are now available. I miss the concept of an ultimate weapon for each character, like hidden somewhere in the world. This might just be me yelling into the void because it doesn't seem like this is an element of JRPGs that the Paper Mario series ever intends to incorporate. The Mario and Luigi series does. In fact, Brothership has like the perfect balance, in my opinion, which is a game that's come out since I started writing this review. And that's got the armor, it's got the weapon you equip, but it's not overly complicated like some RPGs can be, where you're equipping a left hand and a right hand and armor and a hat and your pants and your shoes and your rings and everything. Just keep it simple. So, I don't know. Paper Mario doesn't seem interested in that, but the series also seems to be running out of ideas on how to change up its combat mechanics. Like after Thousand Year Door, Super Paper Mario gave up on turn-based combat, favoring more of Mario jumps on enemies platforming style. And after that, the series tried stickers, and then cards, and then that weird spinny board wheel game thing. It's like they're getting further and further away, and I think if they want something different next time around, this would almost be like doing what's familiar would be different for the series at this point. I understand that part of the design of these games is the minimalistic approach. That's why even at the end of the game, you're only dishing out double-digit damage. You never, are dealing out 9,999 like in a Final Fantasy. But just having a weapon and an armor, add an accessory to equip in there too, it isn't going to confuse anyone if you have these 3 things to equip on your 4 things. You got a weapon, an armor, an accessory, and a badge. You could even take the accessory off. The accessory could be the badge, but point is, I miss more of that character customization. Overall, The remake, it feels well worth the wait for me. Everything about Paper Mario that fans have been begging Nintendo to bring back is included in this purchase. A battle system that keeps things varied but doesn't feel tedious or even pointless in the case of Origami King. It's got a rewarding leveling system, characters to fall in love with, NPCs you look forward to hearing from, towns you want to spend time in, and a world you want to live in. So at the end of the day, isn't that what getting a dose of Nintendo therapy is all about? Finding a world you want to live in for a little bit, a place to escape to. So if you're looking for any of those things in a game, I highly recommend a trip through Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. It's worth your time for sure. I don't know if it's the greatest game of all time that some people on the internet build it up to be, but its pros definitely outweigh its cons. The charm outweighs the backtracking, and it's just an overall great ride. It's the perfect length. It doesn't overstay its welcome. So I would absolutely recommend you pick it up if you're on the fence. If you're anybody out there who likes any of the other Mario RPG series, be it Mario and Luigi or Super Mario RPG on the Super Nintendo, or any of the other Paper Marios for that matter, definitely give this one a try. We want to encourage Nintendo to keep making these games more available. And then who knows, maybe we'll see Super Paper Mario show up. Maybe we'll see Star Fox Adventure show up. Maybe we'll start seeing these games on the Switch too that they've been keeping away from us for so long. So thank everybody for listening to these thoughts that I had on Thousand Year Door. As always, we are Nintendo Therapy. You can find us on Blue Sky at Nintendo Therapy. We have a subreddit, Nintendo Therapy. Let me know. Tell me what your thoughts on Thousand Year Door are, especially if this is your first time playing it. Or, you know what? I'm curious in both. If it's your first time playing it, or if you're somebody who was obsessed with the series and has lots of thoughts on the remake, because I know that's the case with me and Mario RPG. That's my version of that, where I loved the Super Nintendo game, so I know absolutely everything that's different in that remake, and I still love it. So let me know if that's the case as well. Get at us on Blue Sky, talk to us on Reddit. We have a subreddit, Nintendo Therapy, on there, and well, we're working on getting more places. So if there's somewhere you want us to be, let us know. And thank you very much for listening. We will be back for our regularly scheduled episode when that drops. See you then.